Hey, everybody, this is the James Dickson Podcast. I'm your host, James David Dickson. Unfortunately, as we begin, I have some bad news to pass on. But before I do, I need to address the most frequently asked question I get. And no, it's not, why do you keep changing the name of your podcast? It's, I want to win in 2026. But what should I do? Who should I call? And what's going to happen then? Here's what you should do. You should listen to this ad. Then you should get in touch with my friends at Americans for Prosperity, Michigan. Whatever your flavor of political involvement might be, whether it's knocking doors or giving testimony to lawmakers, there's opportunities for you. Listen up. Michigan is on the brink. If nothing changes, our state of 10 million people is going to be running solely on unreliable and intermittent energy sources like solar panels and windmills. But something is going to change. We're going to stand up together to save Michigan. And our friends at Americans for Prosperity Michigan are here to give you the tools to take action. If you're watching this, chances are you're the political insider in your friend group. But what if you could change Michigan and not just explain it? What if you could save it by telling your story in front of lawmakers? This is politics where and how it matters most. Grassroots. Last year, AFP Michigan knocked on almost 1 million doors. To win 2026, we'll need to hit 1 million more. The other guys will talk about affordable this and cheap that. We'll talk about prosperity and how a government that can't fix the darn roads stands in the way of it. Stevens T. Mason is not walking through that door, but if you knock on it, Michigan can be saved. As I said at the start, I have some bad news. For a guy who spent his entire adult life in the field of journalism, it's terrible news. But journalism is dying in America. And it's not for the reason you might think. It's not because social media is better or paper is too expensive or anything like that. It's because the people with press badges are flattening the earth and salting. It's because the people with press badges are flattening the land and salting the earth underneath them. They killed off journalism in favor of what I call unjournalism. So if you think journalism is bad now as 2025 turns to 2026, you have no idea how bad things are going to be in just a decade. As I start, let me just be honest about this. I am not rooting for journalism or journalists. As a class, I don't find journalists to be an especially smart or honest or insightful group of people. When the spirit of unjournalism hit Michigan, I didn't say anything about it because, quite frankly, I had other stuff going on, bigger fish to fry. But when it came to Minnesota this week, I noticed a pattern that went beyond Michigan, and now I can't possibly stay quiet about it. Whether it's Michigan or Mogadishu, an evil spirit has overtaken journalism in America. I call it the spirit of unjournalism. And the rise of unjournalism is going to be the biggest problem the field has ever faced. You remember a few months ago when Dan Z at Outkick scooped the entire Michigan media market on a big story? Ann Arbor Skyline High School had a boy playing on the girls' volleyball team. At the time, they were a top contender for the state title. They didn't quite make it all the way. And all this was happening in defiance of Trump's executive order that girls' sports are for girls, not confused boys. Male and female, he created them. I think I read that somewhere. But Dan Z didn't just cover the story. Whether he planned to do this or not, Dan Z brought on the fall of the House of Trans in Michigan. Let's go back to the start. So Outkick is based in Tennessee. How does a guy at a Tennessee news outlet with a national focus, how does such a man end up scooping the entire Michigan media market on this story? How does he get this story to his lonesome even as the response to the story was massive? It's not because we don't have reporters in Michigan, though it is true to say we don't have many good ones. There's a reason we haven't seen a Pulitzer here in more than a decade. No, it's because in the 2020s, journalists in Michigan and a lot of other places define themselves by what stories they don't report. Journalism is a captured institution. This is why most every media outlet in Michigan sucks, because they're no longer in the business of telling true stories. Michigan journalism is FUBU for Democrat activists. It's written by them, it's written for them. Truth does not decide whether a story is told or not. Politics and activist pressure decides everything. So when Dan Z covered the Skyline story, the entire Democrat media alliance in Michigan stood against him. You're not a journalist. They bleated in unison. Lawmakers said this, journalists said this. One journalist even said Dan was transvestigating the Skyline story. And just like that, because they were too stupid to have foresight, the Michigan media brought on the fall of the House of Trans. Journalism is a unique field. Unlike law or teaching or medicine, you don't need a degree to be a journalist. You don't even need a press badge. Outside of Michigan, journalist is not just a job title. It refers to people who do the work of journalism. This can be opinion journalism. This can be news reporting like Dan Z did. It's anything and everything that gets to the truth of the matter. That's journalism. If ever there was a field where somebody could self-identify, it would be journalism. But rather than go with what Dan Z calls himself, which is a journalist, the Democrat Media Alliance said that Dan Z was a conservative activist. It was all they could do, the journalists, to explain why Dan Z had a story that they did not. If you listen to the woke boys tell it, trans is truth. If Dan Z popped up tomorrow as Danielle Z, his woke boy critics would fall to their knees in front of him. They would call him Danielle Z, they would demand that you join them, and they would call you racist or sexist or whatever the word is today if you call Dan the man that he is. So if Dan Z becomes Danielle Z, we all must just accept this. There's no room for questions. There's no room for skepticism. There's no room for the Bible. It's just, it is what you say it is, and we all have to go with it. But when Dan Z does actual journalism, they say he's not a journalist. What this means is that even the woke boys know that trans is BS. Even the woke boys know the limits of self-identification. The woke boys feel more than comfortable calling a man, Dan Z, by a title he does not identify with, a title he does not give himself. This means they don't believe the logic of trans as they do not follow it faithfully. For journalists, woke is not a belief system. It's more a get out of excellence free card. Woke explains why Dan Z's critics haven't produced any journalism this year worth a damn. They don't need to. Just bleed out the approved talking points like the sheep they are, and they'll stay in the continued good graces of the Democrat Media Alliance. I didn't have the words for it back then, but this is the spirit of unjournalism manifest. In 2025, 2026, woke boys pat themselves on the back for the stories they don't cover. Look, we don't do crime stories or run mugshots because that would marginalize colored people. Look, we don't report on boys invading girl sports because that would marginalize confused people. Look, we don't tell the stories that matter because that would hurt the Democrats. At every turn, they're seeking the applause of a woke audience that doesn't actually exist in reality. What they call journalism written in the public interest is actually meant for a small number of woke activists, people who are just as stupid, compromised, and poor as the journalists themselves. Nobody believes any of this stuff, but they all say it anyway. All of liberalism is driven by an evil belief that the ends justify the means. And so if the end of ruining society demands that we call boys girls, they will. If the end of discounting a rival demands calling that journalist an activist, they will. Nothing honest passes through their lips because honesty is not the job. Advancing the cause is the job. What they showed in their treatment of Dan Z is that they never believed in the logic of trans, and they don't believe it now. That, like everything else they do, was a means to an end. Unjournalism is how they justify missing every big story and never doing important work. Think about it. Do you want to come to Michigan and face a hostile crowd and fight hard to get to the truth? Journalism is not an easy field when done right. Or do you want to simply apply a Marxist critique to a given situation, tell yourself that telling the truth is punching down at those people, and hell, if you do that, now you're absolved. Chances are your editor is just as woke as you are. And so in this woke world without standards, you now have justification for never doing work that matters. But there's a problem. Inside your own heart, inside your own soul, you know you're not doing anything that matters. You see Dan Z out here getting scoops that you don't have. You see him getting accolades that you're not getting, and it bothers you. It bothers you because you've told yourself the lie of woke, but no one else believes it. In the real world, a journalist who actually brings home truths that you didn't know is seen as extremely valuable. You're not getting any of those benefits. You're just getting pats on the back from other poor people. And so when someone like Dan Z steps out from the bleeding herd of sheep, it's in their interest to pull him back in. And if you can't do that, then you have to say he was never one of you in the beginning. He's just a creep. He's just leering at the kids. Whatever excuse they use that no one buys, because it wasn't meant for you to buy it. It was meant to make these people who aren't doing their jobs feel better about themselves. I believe that laziness and not social justice is the driving force behind unjournalism. That's why and how Dan Z from Little Outkick scooped the entire Michigan media market, and why their only route of attack was to claim that Dan Z wasn't a journalist. Because if you are a journalist with no stories, and Dan Z is a journalist with big stories, you need to explain that. If not to your editor, who's also an idiot, then to yourself, to the part of you, the heart of hearts, the part of you that can't lie to yourself. But if you can tell yourself that Dan Z is an activist, and that by not doing journalism, you're the real journalist, well, now you can still look yourself in the mirror. You can tell yourself the lie that you're not actually wasting your life. Down in Minnesota, it's a similar story. A young man named Nick Shirley exposed millions in fraudulent grants to Somali daycares and healthcare companies in Minnesota. Here's a brief look at Nick's work.
Here at Future Leaders Early Learning Center, this building received over $3 million. Hello, how are you? I would like to see if I could bring little Joey, my son little Joey here. Is there paperwork or can I check out the daycare? No? Why can't I check out the daycare?
Martin's not here.
Okay, but if can I get paperwork or anything to submit my son little Joey to come in here to daycare? We'd really like to put Joey in this daycare. We've heard great things.
Business card?
No, I would like your business card actually.
Among people who appreciate the truth, Nick's report went viral. Trump officials reported on it. Action's been taken on it. This thing has shaken tectonic plates. But among the unjournalists who have to explain to their editors and their wives and their own soul why this kid is getting stories they don't have, Nick Shirley is a threat. Perhaps he should be killed because he's a threat. And if that sounds extreme, it should. But Politico reporter Josh Gerstein actually put this into words. On X, he wrote, "At some point, the amateur effort to knock on doors of home daycares intersects with robust stand-your-ground laws." As Molly Hemingway of The Federalist pointed out, A, Minnesota is not a stand-your-ground state. B, even in Florida, the king of the stand-your-ground state, you're not allowed to just shoot people because they knock on the door. But from an unjournalist, Joshua Gerstein, we see a gatekeeper argument, similar to what they used in Michigan against Dan Z. This idea that journalism is something that only the pros can do, as opposed to amateurs like Dan Z, activists like Dan Z, amateurs like Nick Shirley. Only us precious few with media badges can be trusted to knock on doors and come home alive. Nick Shirley, he's just taking his life into his own hands, to hear Josh Gerstein tell it. And I'm actually more worried about the criticism from Josh Gerstein. Dan Z's critics in Michigan are generally young, lazy, and stupid guys. They'll mature eventually. They'll get good editors at some point. They'll realize someday that truth matters. probably when the house of woke falls completely. But Josh Gerstein's worse. By the looks of things, Josh Gerstein is no spring chicken. He should have more control of his emotions than that. And when I look at his bylines, I should see more big stories than I see. In fact, I don't see any. I see plenty of coverage of events. I don't see a guy breaking news. I don't see a guy telling me things I don't know. I don't see a guy doing the journalism that goes viral, which is the stuff that tells people they don't know. We used to call that news. As a legal reporter, Josh Gerstein should have a way better grasp of the facts. There's not one state in America where it's legal to shoot and kill someone who knocks on your door. A senior legal reporter at Politico should know this. And I would wager to guess that Josh Gerstein actually does know this. I've said it before, and you guys are going to make me tap the sign. There's nothing so stupid that a journalist won't say it. But Josh Gerstein couldn't help himself. Something inside him needed to furnish an excuse for why this kid is going viral and why Josh Gerstein has to raise the specter of murder to get anyone to care about anything he says. But if you're in Southeast Michigan, Josh Gerstein's tweet wasn't just thinking out loud or a joke. It's something that actually happened with real-life consequences. In November 2013, a woman named Renisha McBride broke down after a car crash in Dearborn Heights. This was early in the morning. She knocked on a man's door for help, and that man, Ted Wafer, shot her dead through the door. Ted Wafer was tried and convicted and sent to prison. He's there right now. Renisha McBride knocked on his door dark, early in the morning, and Ted Wafer was still convicted. I'm thinking that Nick Shirley, knocking on doors in broad daylight, with cameras recording everything, I'm thinking he's going to be in the clear. Josh Gerstein doesn't actually think that Somalis have the legal right to kill Nick Shirley. He's a lazy man who wants to put the competition out of business by any means necessary. The Bible says that by our fruits we are known. Well, the fruit of liberalism is the belief that the ends justify the means. Nick Shirley's reporting is making members of the Democrat Media Alliance uncomfortable, so of course he must be killed. This right there, that's the evil of unjournalism. And that evil spirit has spread from Michigan to Minnesota to Washington. Lazy journalists like Josh Gerstein have long given up on the idea of beating the competition. Their only hope now is to dehumanize them and hope and pray that somebody, some sad soul, takes action on it. Dan Z faced physical confrontation in Ann Arbor, if you can imagine such a thing. If Josh Gerstein had his way, so would Nick Shirley in Minnesota. Once you see this, you can never unsee it. The spirit of unjournalism is everywhere around us, and it is an evil spirit.